Have you ever found yourself wrestling with questions that seem to have no answers? Have you ever wondered why injustice goes unpunished, why the wicked seem to prosper, or why God sometimes appears silent in the midst of our deepest struggles? Today we are diving into the story of Habakkuk, a prophet whose journey from doubt to faith mirrors the struggles many of us face today. Unlike any other book of the Bible, Habakkuk begins with bold questions that challenge God's justice, His methods, and His timing. And God responds in ways that may surprise you. This short yet profound book is not just about a dialogue between a prophet and God, it's about discovering what it means to live by faith, even when life doesn't make sense. In this video, we'll explore how Habakkuk's questions transform into a powerful hymn of faith, how he moves from despair to a deep and unwavering trust in God's goodness. This story holds answers to some of life's toughest questions and provides a timeless message of hope for anyone facing uncertainty. If you've ever grappled with doubt, struggled with God's silence, or yearned for justice, then this video is for you. We'll unravel the incredible lessons from Habakkuk's journey, a story that will challenge and inspire you to see God in a new light. Make sure to watch until the end to catch the life-changing truths that this ancient story has for us today. And if you find this message inspiring, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share with others who need encouragement in their walk of faith. Your support helps us reach more people with the timeless wisdom of the Bible. So, grab your Bible, settle in, and join us as we uncover the complete story of Habakkuk, a story that shows us how to stand firm in faith, even when the world around us seems to be falling apart. Let's begin. Habakkuk was a prophet who lived in the southern kingdom of Judah, likely during the reign of King Jehoiakim, around the late 7th century BC. This was a turbulent period in Judah's history, a time when violence, corruption, and idolatry were rampant among the people. Jehoiakim was a king who, unlike his righteous father Josiah, rejected God's ways and led the nation into moral decay. The leaders of Judah were often unjust, the priests were corrupt, and the people had largely turned away from God to follow false idols. Many scholars believe that Habakkuk's ministry took place shortly before the Babylonian invasion in 605 BC, a pivotal moment when the mighty Babylonian Empire, led by King Nebuchadnezzar, began to rise in power, threatening to overthrow nations, including Judah. This era was marked by fear, uncertainty, and a sense of impending doom as Babylon conquered one nation after another, growing in strength and brutality. Unlike other prophets, Habakkuk did not deliver fiery sermons to the people of Judah or confront the nation's leaders directly. Instead, his ministry was unique because it focused on a deep personal dialogue with God, a candid and honest conversation that captured his internal struggle. Habakkuk was not afraid to bring his complaints, doubts, and fears to the Lord, making his book one of the most personal and relatable in the Bible. This dialogue is preserved in the book of Habakkuk, a small but profound book that consists of just 3 chapters. The story begins with Habakkuk's heartfelt lament. He is a prophet burdened by the deep corruption and violence he witnesses in Judah. In Habakkuk 1 verses 2-4, he cries out, "How long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you, violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me, there is strife and conflict abounds." Habakkuk's words echo the pain of someone who feels like their prayers have gone unanswered for too long. His lament is raw and unfiltered, filled with the anguish of a man who loves his nation, but is deeply grieved by the spiritual and moral decline he sees all around him. Injustice is rampant. Leaders are corrupt, the rich exploit the poor, and violence fills the streets of Jerusalem. Yet despite his constant prayers, God seems silent, indifferent, or even absent. Habakkuk's anguish is not just about the presence of evil, but about God's apparent inaction. He struggles with the question that many believers have faced throughout history: why does God seem to tolerate evil? If God is all-powerful and all-knowing, Why does he allow wickedness to flourish and the righteous to suffer? Habakkuk's questions are not simply intellectual, they are deeply personal, reflecting a heart that longs for God's justice and righteousness to prevail. The prophet is essentially asking, "How long will this go on, God? How long will you remain silent while injustice reigns?" His struggle is not against atheism or disbelief, but against the apparent contradiction between what he knows to be true about God, that he is holy, just, and compassionate, and the harsh reality he sees every day. In the midst of Habakkuk's desperate cries for justice, God finally responds, but his answer is far from what the prophet expected. In Habakkuk, chapter 1, verses 5 to 6, God declares, "Look at the nations and watch, and be utterly amazed. For I am going to do something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told. I am raising up the Babylonians, that ruthless and impetuous people, who sweep across the whole earth to seize dwellings not their own." God's response is shocking. Instead of offering comfort or a promise of peace, he reveals that he is raising up the Babylonians, a brutal and feared empire known for its military prowess and relentless conquests. The Babylonians, who were infamous for their cruelty and aggression, were the last people Habakkuk expected to be part of God's plan. God tells Habakkuk to look at the nations and watch, indicating that the coming events would not be isolated to Judah alone, but would have a global impact. The use of the Babylonians would be an act of divine judgment, a display of God's sovereignty over history, and a demonstration that he is in control even when the world seems chaotic. The Babylonians were known to be a ruthless and powerful force, sweeping across the nations like a devastating storm, leaving destruction in their wake. They were not just conquerors, they were brutal oppressors who took pleasure in domination. The prophet Jeremiah described the Babylonians as a boiling pot tilting away from the north. Jeremiah chapter 1 verse 13, a vivid image of the overflowing violence and destruction they would bring. Habakkuk knew their reputation well, the terror they spread, the fear they evoked, and the absolute authority they wielded over the nations they conquered. For Habakkuk, this response creates an even greater dilemma. It's as if God is saying, "You think the injustice in Judah is bad? Watch what I am about to do. I am bringing an even greater power to bring judgment upon this nation." This left Habakkuk not only perplexed but deeply troubled. God's choice to use the Babylonians seemed to contradict his very nature as a holy and just God. God's response challenges Habakkuk's assumptions about how divine justice should operate. The Babylonians were far worse than Judah in terms of wickedness. They worshipped false gods, engaged in barbaric practices, and their arrogance knew no bounds. Yet God had chosen them as the instrument of his judgment. This creates a profound tension between God's holiness and the apparent injustice of his methods. How could God, who despises evil, use an empire renowned for its evil to bring about his purposes? After receiving God's unsettling response about using the Babylonians to judge Judah, Habakkuk is more troubled than before. It seems incomprehensible to him that a holy and righteous God would use a nation as corrupt and violent as Babylon as an instrument of judgment. His heart is heavy, and he turns again to God, voicing his confusion and doubt. In Habakkuk 1 verse 12 to 13, he pours out his second concern. "Lord, are you not from everlasting? My God, my Holy One, you will never die. You, Lord, have appointed them to execute judgment. You, my rock, have ordained them to punish. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves?" Habakkuk's question is both an acknowledgement of God's character and a profound challenge to his methods. He begins by affirming his faith. "Lord, are you not from everlasting? My God, my Holy One, you will never die." Habakkuk knows that God is eternal, holy, and just. He calls God his rock, a symbol of steadfastness and strength, recognizing that God has the authority to judge. Yet, this makes God's actions even more perplexing. How could the God who is too pure to look on evil use a nation as wicked as Babylon to punish a people who, despite their sins, are still more righteous than the Babylonians? After voicing his second, even more agonizing question, Habakkuk waits. He stations himself on the watchtower, expectant and vigilant, determined to hear from God once more. And God does respond, a response that offers not just answers, but hope and a promise of justice. In Habakkuk, chapter 2, verses 2 to 4, God says, "Write down the revelation and make it plain on tablets so that a herald may run with it. For the revelation awaits an appointed time, it speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. See, the enemy is puffed up. His desires are not upright, but the righteous person will live by his faithfulness." God's instruction to write down the revelation is significant. In the ancient world, writing a message on tablets was a way of preserving an important decree, a record for the ages that would outlast fleeting events. This wasn't just a message for Habakkuk, but a timeless truth for all generations to come. God tells Habakkuk to make the message clear so that a herald may run with it. This suggests that the message is urgent and universal, meant to be spread far and wide. God acknowledges that the fulfillment of his promises may linger, but he assures Habakkuk that they are certain to come. There is an appointed time, and God's timing, though often mysterious to human understanding, is never wrong. This is a call for patience, trust, and unwavering faith, even when circumstances appear to contradict God's promises. In the remainder of chapter 2, God delivers a powerful response to Habakkuk's questions, a series of 5 woes directed against the Babylonians. These woes are not just pronouncements of judgment, they are a revelation of the deep moral and spiritual rot within Babylon, exposing the sinful practices that will eventually lead to its downfall. Each woe targets a specific aspect of Babylon's wickedness, highlighting that God is neither blind nor indifferent to the suffering caused by their ruthless actions. The first woe speaks to the Babylonians' greed and exploitation. In Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 6, God declares, "Woe to him who piles up stolen goods and makes himself wealthy by extortion." How long must this go on? The Babylonians built their empire on the backs of the oppressed, accumulating wealth through unjust means, plundering cities, seizing treasures, and extorting the weak. They exploited the labor of conquered nations to build their lavish palaces and towering fortresses, caring little for the lives they destroyed in the process. But God's judgment is clear. Those who build their fortunes on stolen wealth will ultimately face ruin, and their ill-gotten gains will turn to dust. The second woe addresses the violence and bloodshed of the Babylonians. In Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 9 to 11, God proclaims, "Woe to him who builds his house by unjust gain, setting his nest on high to escape the clutches of ruin. You have plotted the ruin of many peoples, shaming your own house and forfeiting your life. The stones of the wall will cry out, and the beams of the woodwork will echo it." The Babylonians were known for their cruelty, shedding innocent blood without remorse. They built their empire through conquest and violence, believing that their power would protect them from retribution. Yet God promises that the very structures they built with blood-stained hands will testify against them. The imagery of the stones of the wall crying out symbolizes that the foundations of their empire, built on oppression, cannot stand. They will eventually collapse under the weight of their own iniquity. The third woe condemns the oppression and exploitation of the nations. In Habakkuk chapter 2, verses 12 to 14, God declares, "Woe to him who builds a city with bloodshed and establishes a town by injustice. Has not the Lord Almighty determined that the people's labor is only fuel for the fire, that the nations exhaust themselves for nothing? For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea." This woe is a direct challenge to Babylon's belief in their own invincibility. They thought their empire would last forever, established through the sweat and toil of the enslaved. But God reveals the futility of their ambitions. Their cities, built on the backs of the oppressed, will be consumed by fire, symbolizing destruction and divine judgment. In contrast, God's glory will endure, spreading across the earth like the waters cover the sea, a stark contrast to Babylon's temporary power. The fourth woe condemns the immorality and debauchery of the Babylonians. In Habakkuk, chapter 2, verses 15 to 16, God says, "Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbors, pouring it from the wineskin till they are drunk, so that he can gaze on their naked bodies. You will be filled with shame instead of glory. Now it is your turn. Drink and let your nakedness be exposed. The cup from the Lord's right hand is coming around to you, and disgrace will cover your glory." Babylon was not only known for its violence, but also for its depravity and moral corruption. They manipulated and humiliated their conquered foes, using drunkenness and debauchery to degrade and control them. God declares that Babylon's turn has come. They will drink the cup of his wrath, and their glory will be replaced with shame. The image of the cup is a powerful biblical symbol of God's judgment, often used to represent the full measure of his righteous anger. Babylon's humiliation will be complete, and they will be stripped of their power and dignity. The fifth woe condemns Babylon's idolatry and false worship. In Habakkuk chapter 2, verses 18 to 20, God declares, "Of what value is an idol carved by a craftsman, or an image that teaches lies? For the one who makes it trusts in his own creation. He makes idols that cannot speak. Woe to him who says to wood, 'Come to life,' or to lifeless stone, 'Wake up.' Can it give guidance? It is covered with gold and silver. There is no breath in it. The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him." The Babylonians trusted in their idols, carved images made of wood and stone, covered in gold and silver. They worshipped the work of their own hands, believing that these lifeless objects held power and could guide them. But God exposes the futility of idolatry, declaring that these so-called gods are empty and powerless. In contrast, the true God reigns in his holy temple, and the whole earth is called to stand in silent awe before him. This final woe is not just a condemnation of Babylon, but a call to all humanity to recognize the emptiness of false worship and the supremacy of the living God. These five woes are not merely pronouncements of doom, they are a promise of justice. God assures Habakkuk and all who listen that he sees every act of injustice, every ounce of bloodshed, and every moment of cruelty. His justice, though often delayed, is certain. The Babylonians, who appear invincible in their power, are already marked for judgment. Their fall is inevitable because God's standard of righteousness cannot be compromised. God's message to Habakkuk is clear: the wicked will not go unpunished. Even the mightiest empires will crumble before his judgment. For God's justice is not an empty threat, it is a reality that shapes the destiny of nations and individuals alike. The five woes serve as both a warning and a comfort. A warning to those who defy God's ways, and a comfort to those who wait for his justice, trusting that he sees all and will act in his perfect time. After a journey of questioning, doubt, and divine revelations, Habakkuk's attitude transforms. He moves from fear and confusion to a place of deep trust in God's sovereignty. The final chapter of Habakkuk is a powerful prayer, a psalm that rises from the depths of his soul. It is a hymn of faith that reflects both a trembling awe of God's power and a profound assurance of his faithfulness. In Habakkuk chapter 3, verse 2, he begins with a humble and reverent acknowledgement. "Lord, I have heard of your fame. I stand in awe of your deeds, Lord. Repeat them in our day. In our time, make them known. In wrath, remember mercy." Habakkuk's opening words are a plea for God to act once again, as he has in the past. He recalls the stories of old, the great deeds of God's deliverance, his miracles, and his interventions in Israel's history. He longs for God to repeat those mighty acts, to show his power in the present crisis. Yet, even as he asks for God's justice, Habakkuk's prayer is tempered with a plea for mercy. He understands that God's wrath is righteous, but he also knows that God's mercy is his greatest attribute. Habakkuk's prayer continues with a vivid and poetic description of God's power and glory. In Habakkuk 3:3-15, he recounts the awe-inspiring manifestations of God's might, imagery that echoes the great theophanies of the Old Testament. He describes God as coming from Teman and Mount Paran, clothed in splendor, with rays of light flashing from his hand, where his power is hidden. It's a vision of God as the warrior and protector of his people, marching through the earth with unstoppable force. His glory covered the heavens, and his praise filled the earth. His splendor was like the sunrise, rays flashed from his hand, where his power was hidden. Habakkuk 3 verses 3-4. The language is filled with vivid and symbolic imagery. God's wrath shakes the mountains, his presence splits the rivers, and his power leaves nations trembling. Habakkuk's words are a poetic retelling of how God has intervened throughout history to rescue his people from their enemies, displaying his sovereignty over nature and the nations. This part of the prayer reminds Habakkuk and us that God is not distant or uninvolved. He is active, powerful, and more than capable of delivering his people from any threat. As Habakkuk recounts these mighty acts, he feels the weight of God's presence, both terrible and comforting. He acknowledges that God's justice is fierce, but so is his mercy. There is a shift in his tone, from fear to a confident assurance that God's promises will not fail, no matter how dire the circumstances seem. His prayer is not just a reminder of what God has done, but a declaration of faith in what God will do. In the closing verses of his prayer, Habakkuk makes a profound statement of faith that transcends his circumstances. He acknowledges that hardship is inevitable, that famine, loss, and scarcity may come, but his faith will not waver. In Habakkuk 3 verses 17-18, he declares, "Though the fig tree does not bud and there are no grapes on the vines, though the olive crop fails and the fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen and no cattle in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in God my Savior." This is a remarkable moment of surrender, a decision to rejoice in God, not because the circumstances have improved, but because God is enough. Habakkuk's faith has moved from being conditional on his understanding of God's actions to being unconditional, rooted in God's character alone. His joy is no longer tied to the blessings he can see or the success of his nation, but to the unchanging nature of God, who is his Savior. Habakkuk's prayer is a powerful reminder that true faith is not about having all the answers, but about trusting God in the midst of uncertainty. It's about finding joy in the faithfulness of God, even when every earthly security fails. His declaration, "I will rejoice in the Lord," is a statement of defiant hope, a refusal to be overwhelmed by circumstances, and a commitment to trust in the God who reigns over all. In his final verse, Habakkuk expresses the source of his strength. "The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer. He enables me to tread on the heights." Habakkuk chapter 3 verse 19. This imagery of the deer, sure-footed and agile on rocky and dangerous heights, is a symbol of stability and confidence. Habakkuk is saying that God gives him the ability to navigate the treacherous terrain of life with grace and assurance. Even in the darkest valleys and the most challenging circumstances, God will make him walk securely, guiding his steps to higher ground. The book of Habakkuk concludes not with easy answers, but with a powerful hymn of faith, a declaration that God is trustworthy even when his ways are hard to understand. Habakkuk's journey is a testament to the transformative power of faith. He started with questions and doubts, but he ends with a song of praise and a firm resolve to trust in God's unchanging goodness. His story encourages us to move beyond a faith that depends on circumstances and to embrace a faith that endures, anchored in the character of God, who is both just and merciful. Habakkuk's journey from doubt to faith is a powerful reminder that God is in control, even when the world seems out of control. May we, like Habakkuk, learn to rejoice in the Lord, no matter our circumstances. If you found this video meaningful, please like, subscribe, and share it with others who may need this message of hope and faith.